and get started, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for joining us today for EJF's Board Learning Services. I am Mira Brown, Director of Internal Operations for EJF Real Estate Services. We are privileged to be joined today by Molly Peacock of Reese Broom PC for a presentation about the best practices for minute taking for community associations. Molly Peacock is a lawyer at Reese Broom PC, which is headquartered in Tysons, Virginia. Molly has been serving as general regular legal counsel for community associations in Washington, D.C. and Virginia since 2006. She serves on the D.C. Legislative Action Committee with Scott Burka of EJF, and one of their current projects is assisting draft legislation for D.C. homeowners associations. Molly enjoys helping cut through the fog, create clarity, and enable healthy functioning for condos and HOAs in our D.C. metro area. A few housekeeping notes for the webinar. All attendees will be on mute, but I will be monitoring the Q&A, so please feel free to put your questions there. We will also have a Q&A session at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be available in the board learning section of EJF's website. We will send you an email when the recording is posted. Finally, Molly has graciously provided us with a sample minutes template. This will be included in the written materials posted to our website. So thank you again for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and turn this over to Molly. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mira. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Well, if you are associated and familiar with one of the most extraordinary and excellent management companies around, EJF, and if you are serving your community as a member of your board of directors, say for your condominium in Washington, D.C., Maryland, or Virginia, and you're here ready to learn a few things about meeting minutes, then you're in the right place. And welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We'll try and make this kind of fun, even though at first blush it may seem like a dry and boring topic. Oh, no, it's not. Well, we're going to laser focus on meeting minutes today, even though meeting minutes, of course, require a meeting. And having a meeting to have a meeting is very tempting, isn't it? Or having a class about how to have a good meeting, that's a whole different class. So we might bleed into topics such as meetings in general, but at first anyway, for the next 30, 35, 40 minutes, I'd like to talk to you about what meeting minutes are supposed to be, why they're important, the main legal implications of meeting minutes, and how are you supposed to effectuate them, or how do you make them be part of your books and records, which probably sounds like a buzzword. It is. We might go on a few tangents today to talk a little bit about Robert's rules, if there's ever an action without a meeting, and executive session meeting minutes. All very interesting and controversial topics, especially that last one. But I'm going to try to laser focus on meeting minutes at first anyway, using these slides as my backdrop. So on to our slides. Minutes are the corporate record of your condominium association or homeowners association. They, in simplest form, they record the board's decisions, also known as votes. And they provide really the membership of your community a way to see the sausage being made after the fact. All three jurisdictions in our metro area have to have open board meetings these days. DC, you didn't used to until pretty recently. You could have secret meetings, but now we have to have open meetings. So if somebody doesn't come to a meeting, then they don't know, hey, why is there a special assessment, or what is my money being used for? So meeting minutes, if you want to go back to that first slide, sorry, Mira. I underline votes. So really, probably one of the most essential aspects of minutes is that they exist and they record what the votes are. And you could ask your lawyer, your manager, hey, do we really need to say who voted how? And there's multiple opinions about that. I can talk about that. By the way, another somewhat housekeeping, I enjoy questions the most. So I'm going to try to get through this presentation quickly so I can get to your questions. And I mentioned to Mira, hey, do we want to take questions in the middle or all the end? Mira, if you see an urgent question or a question you think would be good to interject, please feel free to do so. And then otherwise, I'll try to take everybody's questions towards the end. Okay, next slide. So why do we have meeting minutes? You just heard a little bit of a lecture about why. Well, we need to record what the board did and what it authorized. Sadly, we hope we will never end up in litigation, right? That's the whole goal. Litigation is very stressful, very expensive. It usually means some sort of problem happened. But if we end up having even a dispute or litigation or mediation or a dispute resolution through an agency process, like all three jurisdictions have, it's very important to have meeting minutes to protect us. It shows what the board's actions were. Once you get into a rhythm of meeting minutes, it shows the board's fiduciary duty compliance. So for example, it'll say here, yes, we did hire so-and-so, no, we didn't hire so-and-so, and we signed off on the contract. It also allows the membership to see, as I've mentioned, what the board is up to. Next slide. Good reasons to have. Are they required by, so these are good reasons, but does the law require? Yes, the law requires meeting minutes to exist and be taken. DC law has various references. Maryland law and Virginia law also have various references, and we don't need to get bogged down with the wording of the statute. By the way, fun fact, as you maybe caught from Mira, DC does not have a homeowners association act. So if you're a homeowners association in Washington, DC coming to this lovely presentation, you may say, yay, I don't have to do minutes, right? Well, you may not have an act that says you have to write meeting minutes, but probably your documents require it in some form or fashion. And if you don't have meeting minutes, then basically you have a huge headache if you try to prove that you actually did hire someone, or you did something properly, or you did have a meeting in compliance with your documents. So these are thank you, Mira, perfect, you were reading my mind, flipping through the Maryland and Virginia legal requirements, directing everybody who's on a board that they have to have minutes. So next slide. Well, what if the board, I mentioned a tangent. Well, here's a tangent that causes a fair amount of, I guess controversy is a little strong, but discussion and very good practical questions of, well, my board meets about once a quarter or even once a month, but a lot of times we have to do something in between meetings. So where does that leave us? Do we have to call a special board meeting every time, or can't we just vote over email? And many of you who are here are probably very well educated and know full well that yes, and either your documents or the relevant law says you can act between meetings, or you can have an action without a meeting. You just have to, the action must be unanimously approved by all board members. Well, the best way to record that is in meeting minutes, which means what I usually say the simplest way to do this is to print all of the email votes, attach them to your next meeting minutes, and also ratify the in-between e-vote at that next meeting. And then voila, you have a nice set of meeting minutes showing a legal action in between meetings. So you'll see that we have a Maryland corporate statute, a Virginia corporate statute, many that require what I just mentioned, which is unanimity for any action in between meetings. The tricky part is recording that unanimity, which is why I pulled this into a meeting minutes presentation here. Sometimes it seems like there is some controversy or some doubt or some difficulty with keeping track of decisions that happen in between meetings. And I'm here to tell you it is doable. Print them out, establish for yourself a good system and process by which you create and store meeting minutes and keep track of those e-votes in between. Now, one might think, well, wait a minute, that does sound like a fair amount of energy and actions that I have to do to keep track of e-voting and unanimous votes in between meetings. Sounds like a hassle. Well, yes, it can be a hassle. It can be a little bit of liability exposure if we don't have unanimity on an action, although that exposure is pretty well cured by a ratification vote at an upcoming meeting. But consider, and again, another tangent, consider holding a special board meeting. Frequently, I've noticed that it can be a lot less time consuming to actually call a special board meeting if something comes up and we're thinking, oh, we need to do an action without a meeting and then record that in the minutes. How do I do that? What did Peacock say in that seminar? It sounded really complicated. Well, you can call a special meeting usually pretty easily, and it does have to be open, but you don't have to send out notices to every single unit owner. Usually you post it in the normal way that you normally post regular board meetings, board meeting minutes. And sometimes the notice period is less for special meetings, therefore you can have the meeting fairly easily. So that is a lot to say about action in between meetings and the nexus with minutes. I would encourage any questions. Here we go on our other tangent, which is, what about meetings minutes taken during executive session? Well, why am I even asking this? Well, the reason is, as you probably know, executive session is a time when the board of directors can speak about certain, usually statutorily defined topics. Maryland, Virginia, DC have specific reasons that you're allowed to go into closed session or have a secret part of your meeting. And you have to be, in your minutes, you have to record why you're going into executive session. You want to do that in your minutes so everything's on the up and up. And you want to, during your executive session, stick to those topics and not go off topic. And really, I don't know, a fundamental mind frame is, if I were a unit owner and I didn't trust the board to make good decisions, would I want to see the sausage being made? If I had the energy to even come to an open board meeting, would I want to see myself deciding about this pool repair project or special assessment or bank loan or any number of important topics involving everybody's dues money? Many of those topics should be discussed in a way that is transparent and honest, and in a way that homeowners can come see it if they wish. Well, some of those topics are allowed to be discussed in closed session, and you can talk to your lawyer about what, what topics for your situation.
Hey, Molly, we had a question come up. Can you clarify exactly what the executive session is? The question in the chat is an exec session just the president, treasurer, secretary, like just the officers of the board? So can you define what executive session is, please?
Happy to. Thank you for the question and for the timeliness. Executive session should comprise all of the board members. And you just mentioned a slew of officers. Sometimes an officer is not a board member. Sometimes, say, the secretary or an assistant secretary is not an elected director. That officer who is not a director should not be part of executive session. That said, there are times when a board can make a legal and well-grounded decision to include a non-board member, homeowner or officer perhaps of the community in executive session if there's a good reason for that. So yes, executive session takes place is constituted by everybody, all the board members who are present at that particular regular or special meeting. It may not be every single board member. It should be a quorum though, or else you wouldn't be able to, it would be not a meeting if you don't have quorum of the board, which is usually a majority of board members. So that's who it, I hope that answers the question. You can chime in the chat if it doesn't. So back to, do we take minutes? Well, it's a philosophical question. The statutes, I notice, contemplate, especially Maryland, contemplates minutes are taken during executive session. And honestly, I don't know why that is, because first off, those minutes, then there's a question, are those minutes subject to books and records disclosure, mandatory disclosure? Because yes, you can go into executive session and be in closed session and exclude your membership from that portion of your meeting. However, there's no mention in any of the statutes you can withhold the executive session minutes. Now, logically, yeah, you can withhold, but during executive session, you're not supposed to vote. You can discuss, but you're supposed to come out of executive session back into open session, theoretically making an announcement in Zoom or in your meeting room. Okay, we're coming back into open session now, and theoretically people can enter the room again or enter the Zoom again and watch a vote occur. Now, at least in Virginia, I'm thinking other jurisdictions too, there is law that says you can code a vote to protect someone's privacy. Let's say you need to fine Joe Smith down the street for having improper shutters, or fine so-and-so condo unit owner for having a pink door. You don't want to tell everybody the unit number or address or name of the homeowner that you're fining, and you're allowed to not have to broadcast that information. So you can do a coding system when you come out into open session to vote about something sensitive, such as a rules infraction that you are enforcing. But you do have to vote in open session, which means you must not vote in executive session. And push came to shove, if a board were sued and the board had to defend itself, it would be a problem in that lawsuit if the board had to say truthfully, well, we voted about XYZ matter in executive session. That would be a liability factor for sure, because you're not supposed to. So if there's no votes during executive session, then, and minutes are supposed to really, the whole point of minutes is to show what votes occurred. I think it's more of a burden than a help to have minutes in executive session. I think you can ask your lawyer, you can think about this yourself, but what would be the point? We would then have this document that there's maybe a question, maybe we could withhold it, sure, but we have to keep track of it, I guess. Now, you might think, well, how am I supposed to remember everything that I talked about in executive session? And shouldn't there be some sort of record of what we talked about to make it legitimate? And the answer is, you can make your own notes during executive session, your own personal notes. You can share those. I would recommend destroying those notes after a period of time, a month or two, just so they don't have to be implicated in any way in any kind of books and records disclosure or even discovery if something was really that controversial. So notes is generally, I would, if I were a board, I am on the board and I do take executive session notes and I store them after a period of time myself. So that's what I do. So even though you could take executive session minutes, I personally think it's easier to not take them because it's pointless because there's no votes. So next slide. Can meetings be recorded? Yes, usually they can be. Or usually, when I say usually, I mean the statute in Virginia anyway specifically says meetings can be recorded. This obviously came up, and yes, it did come up a whole lot many years ago in Virginia, where many of my clients did too, very vehemently opposed the recordation of meetings. It seems like this was in the olden times, the innocent days, long before COVID even, where the recording of meetings was a very novel and scary concept. Now it's blasé, right? We can record meetings, no problem. But we as the administration can regulate the recordation of meetings. We can issue a rule saying you can't be disruptive when you record. You have to give us notice. If you give a rule that says that, then you can enforce that rule, have a heads up. But the reality is many of my clients themselves record meetings and post those, if any, for the sake of transparency on the website and let anybody watch the open session of the meeting at their leisure if they wish. It would be a recording for that purpose to show transparency. Honestly, I think that's overboard, but you can do that. I'm just pausing because I thought I saw a Q&A. So can meetings be recorded? Yes, they can.
Molly, there was a question that came across, and it's how long should the board keep Zoom recordings? If they Zoom record, how long should they retain them?
Great question. I would say if a meeting talks about something that has a long lifespan, so sometimes you'll be talking about a loan where the life of the loan is a period of years, and you want to keep track of whatever you talked about. So I'm now talking about the exception to the rule I'm about to say. I was about to say you should keep recordings for 3 months, maybe 6 months. There might sometimes be a meeting where you really want to keep that recording for quite some time for some good reason, and that's fine. But it's great to have a policy in place to destroy recordings after, I say a short time. Because honestly, when you have to hire your lawyer to listen to the recording for 2 hours and then tell you, it's not great that so-and-so said this was a mistake. Okay, we'll have to figure out how we tap dance around this comment, not by the board perhaps, but by anybody in the meeting. That is a lot of dollars, and it's not legally mandated to record meetings. It's an example, I think, of a pendulum swing going a little bit overboard on being a little too transparent to record meetings and allow them, and we simply don't have a legal requirement to do that. So however, recording meetings and allowing people to look at the recordings is a great way to establish trust. And when everything's hunky-dory about that, and you don't need to involve the lawyer and pay big legal fees to go through those recordings, it's a fine thing to do. I'm just, you have to weigh, is it expensive to do? If so, maybe we should reconsider, since we don't have to do it. So those are my thoughts about recording meetings.
So Molly, at the last point on here, you mentioned a seasoned minute taker. We
Yes.
did have a question come up, and I can't remember if you have a slide about this, but the question was, who should be taking the minutes? And since you referenced a seasoned minute taker there, could you weigh in on who should be taking your minutes?
I will gladly do so. And I'm just looking very quickly in my little slides to see if we cover this in a slide, now we're ahead of ourselves. Seasoned minute taker. As of today, you all will understand a little more about what minutes are supposed to be. A seasoned minute taker does not take down verbatim everybody's comments. A seasoned minute taker notes date, time, place, manner, notes all those who are present. And here's a decision point the board can make. You want to note all the board members present and absent. Whether you want to record everybody, who everyone else is up to you. It might be useful to know which unit owners, homeowners are there. And if there's a guest, might be helpful to know that, and a nice thing to have in your minutes. It's not really that, it's not legally mandatory, but it's not also, the usefulness is really up to you. How you want to record exactly what each motion is, who seconded it, and the voting on that motion. And then we get to what I mentioned earlier, a question of, do you want to say who on the board voted how? Well, there are some advantages of doing that. If a motion was approved unanimously, of course you just refer to whoever was present at that board meeting to understand who voted in favor. If there was a 3-2 vote, 4-1 vote, or an abstention, and if it's a controversial topic, there is some usefulness in knowing who voted how, because later on, if someone's very upset about a board vote, the person that didn't vote in favor or did vote in favor could be dismissed from an action based on understanding the minutes saying how that person voted. So there is some theoretical value to knowing who voted how. There's also arguments against that. Sometimes there's politics, small p politics, and people dislike and like each other. And so they try to use a vote count against someone in some way. So it might be a protective kind of action to not record in minutes who voted how, even though everyone could see who goes to the meeting. So that's a judgment call. And that's about it for meeting minutes. There can be the seasoned minute taker can make a summary statement here and there about other topics discussed during the minutes, but no opinions. We don't need any opinion. Well, we don't want the opinion of the minute taker in the meeting minutes. Of course, there are going to be opinion statements made at the meeting, and whether those are recorded in meetings is up to the board's discretion in talking with the minute taker. You could tell the minute taker, I would like what Peacock said, the bare minimum, or Peacock is, she's a little bare bones. I'd like a little more flavor in these minutes and information for people about what we actually talked about. It was, after all, 1 hour meeting, 3 hour meeting, 2 hour meeting, whatever. So it'd be nice to sort of let people know why it went that long, even though there was only 2 votes. Or not.
So the specific question, Molly, was, is it the secretary? And I think and I can weigh in on that as a manager, it doesn't have to be the secretary. It usually falls to the secretary. I have had associations that hire minute takers.
Yep.
I had a wonderful association where there was a former board member volunteer who came in and volunteered to take the minutes for the meeting, which allows the board to participate more. It allows the secretary to participate more in the meeting. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the secretary. That's what a lot of associations default to.
That's exactly right. Yep, well said. Doesn't what I have seen very often is the secretary. One of the secretary's roles or duties is to effectuate the recordation. Sometimes they say, or the taking of minutes or the storing of minutes. Doesn't mean secretary has to do the minutes, but frequently it makes sense for the secretary to do the minutes. It's kind of an expectation of that role, perhaps. But you're right, it doesn't have to be the secretary, it can be the president. It really falls on the whole board, but perhaps the president as leader to make sure minutes are accomplished. So whether we have a plan in advance of hiring someone or selecting a volunteer to do that, or rotating who has this chore amongst board members, there's a lot of different options, but they do have to get done. But it doesn't have to be the secretary, correct? It can be all those people you mentioned. So Robert's rules. Well, Robert's rules, oh, look, I have a little visual aid. Oh, yeah. So this is the 12th edition, and you'll see it's kind of thick. So some people think, oh, gee, Molly, I can't even look at Robert's rules. It gives me an ice cream headache. I can understand that. But little fun fact, I can understand that due to the length of this. And Robert's rules really discusses meetings. Of course, it discusses minutes too. And it has a great nugget in this most recent version, which is the 12th edition. But before I get to that great nugget, I just thought I'd talk a short while about the genesis of Robert's rules, which probably all the scholars attending to this program today know. But Robert's rules was created by a military guy who was assigned by the military in the 1800s to attend and preside over a public meeting that took place in a church. And this guy, whose last name was Roberts, his first name is like Harry or something like that. Anyway, couldn't believe what a waste of time the meeting was. It was totally chaotic. Everyone was yelling, nothing got done. And it was very frustrating for this military guy in this church witnessing such a waste of time and then having to be so aggravated. Sounds familiar, right? So he thought, oh, there's got to be a better way to have meetings. So he created Robert's Rules of Order. And the way he created it was he looked at all the books at the time about parliamentary law and procedure. And there were books even in the 1800s about that topic. So he read all those, and then he created the first edition back in, I think, 1876, something like that. But if you read it or you have a cheat sheet, and by the way, I did a cheat sheet. If anyone wants my cheat sheet, I'm happy to email it to you. Just email me. If you look at even just the cheat sheet, which is set out in a chart, you can start to see, oh yes, I see how this framework can make a meeting far more productive than our meetings. I've noticed that from personal experience and also from being the lawyer for boards of directors. So little plug for Robert's Rules is it really does save time, even though it seems like it takes up time because it's such a thick book and all these procedures. How on earth could I ever even speak that language or keep track of everything? Well, little by little, it is a good investment in your time if you're interested in having very productive meetings. So to wit, the most recent edition had this to say about meeting minutes. Instead of going through, some boards go through this dance at the beginning of the board meeting saying, can I please have a formal motion to approve the meeting minutes? And then there's an awkward silence because people scrambling, did I get those? Where are they? I know I'm on the Zoom. This is, so there's maybe 5 to several minutes where people aren't sure if they were supposed to read the minutes or if they don't have the minutes. And they're trying to figure out a good response to, can I have a motion to approve? And sometimes that motion so moved or sometimes not because we don't have minutes or postpone or something. Well, or everyone has the minutes and somebody says, I move to approve last month's meeting minutes. Can I get a second? I second. All in favor? No, there's a correction edit. Okay, that whole process can take 5 to 10 minutes or more. Doesn't seem like a long time, but adding up over the course of several meetings, it does add up. And it's kind of, well, for me, because I've seen so many meetings, I feel like it's so useless. Well, Robert's Rules felt my pain, heard my thoughts, and said, okay, if you send around meeting minutes in advance, the chair of the meeting, which is usually the president, but it doesn't have to be, can presume, especially if you build this into your pre-meeting prep work, can presume that everybody that was sent meeting minutes, which in the case of a board of directors is the board members, and the homeowners can ask for meeting minutes if they wish, or they can be made available, the board packet, at a designated time prior to the board meeting. Now I'm getting into meeting aspects, which we can talk about if you want at the meetings class, whenever that will be. So anyway, those board meetings, if they get meeting minutes a day or 3 days or so before the meeting, they're presumed to have read them, and there doesn't need to be a formal vote to approve meeting minutes. The chair can say, I believe everybody has the meeting minutes, and then somebody say, I don't, or, why do you think that? But a good system is, yes, they do. And I presume there are no changes. And so I deem the meeting minutes approved. And that, as well as any, I think next slide shows, yeah, the correction of minutes. Sorry, can you go back one, Mira? Sorry. The correction of minutes is an example of business that is normally handled by unanimous consent. Someone at any time, if there is a deemed approval of that sort, for example, for the meeting minutes by the chair of the meeting, and someone sees a mistake in the meeting minutes, you're not out of time to call attention to the mistake. You can say, even after the chair says approved, you can say, whoa, wait a minute, chair, I just noticed that it says I was absent, but I was really present, so we need to amend the meeting minutes. Okay, we will amend the meeting minutes, even after. So that's okay. It's a very flexible process, but it does allow the chair to deem them approved. But it does put some work on all of the directors to really read the meeting minutes and make sure if you see an error, speak up on your own. So, yes, next slide. Yes, this is, I think I explained this. So here we go. Look at us. We are completely ahead of the game. It's 12:34, 4 minutes past the 30-minute mark. I was hoping to be completely finished to take your questions, but that's okay. We still have, I think, time. So just going to read this slide to make sure we said all this. Yes. So as Mira said, a volunteer or director who understands the task of meeting minutes is the person that should take meeting minutes with a heads up in advance. So in summary, why do we take meeting minutes? Because it's legally required to account to our fellow neighbors and property owners what we're doing, and to ourselves. And oh yes, here's a little point that is a huge point that Scott Burka has reminded me of when we practiced for this, which is that lenders have been changing their requirements of what information they are requiring of condominium associations in order to consider whether to underwrite a loan. And one of the requirements that lenders in DC, but I think in other jurisdictions too, have been imposing is to see meeting minutes. So are lenders allowed to ask for this? Great question. Ask a good lawyer that. I think they are, by the way, but that's a whole different question. Are we allowed to say no? Also a good question. I don't think either of those have been litigated, but lenders are permitted to understand what their risks are. And let me give you an example. One thing I do, especially when I have a new client that I'm taking on, or when I'm going to a big meeting for a client to talk about something very important, so important that they're having me come out to the meeting, I ask the board, oh, can you send me the last 6 months or 12 months of meeting minutes, please? New client or upcoming meeting client. And some boards say, what? Why are you asking me this? I'm not trying to be scary, but it's a great way for me to quickly see what is going on with the community. For lenders, they must have it. They want to see what kind of decisions are being made, what the financials are. A lot of times minutes will have some verbiage about financials. minutes are not the sole, not even the main source of financial information for lenders. But it will give the lenders a flavor for the fiduciary fulfillment by the board of their duties. So if you don't have meeting minutes, I dare say the lender is not going to be a happy camper and maybe not authorize a loan. So there's potentially a direct correlation to property values of taking good minutes. Hence, we're having a whole class about it today. So I think that's one of our last slides, practice tip. Yes. Aha, yes. Here are some practice tips Mira and I discussed too, is the smoothest meetings usually involve the board and management circulating an agenda prior to the meeting, and then the smoothest meeting minute taking and meetings. That agenda can be the backbone for the meeting minutes. And if there was no vote taken on action item number 3, because that is still in discussion, or we're premature to vote to hire such and such contract or do such and such action, that's fine. Then you don't have a vote, but you have that topic, and perhaps you have one summary kind of sentence under that topic area in your agenda for what occurred during the meeting with regard to that particular topic number 3, or 1 through 5. And then this slide also discusses what we've already been over. We don't need to write down verbatim. We're not a stenographer. That's not the function of minutes. Minutes show the actions of the board and that the meeting took place and quorum was there.
So that's the end of the slides, and the next one is the sample minutes that we'll be sending out. But nobody has any active questions in the Q&A, but I wanted to invite people, if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you, or you can drop a question in the Q&A. But that is the total of Molly's presentation. So we wanted to make sure we had time if people had questions they wanted to ask. So feel free, like I said, raise your hand or drop a question in the chat. All right. And like I said, the sample minutes are going to be included in the written materials that we're going to post on our website. So I know I saw one question about sending them out. So we'll make sure that those get added. I'm not seeing any questions. The only thing that came up in the Q&A was just a thank you. So, oh, wait. What are the board meeting notice requirements in DC law?
A lot of times you will, I can look that up really quickly, but also check your condominium instruments. I'm assuming this is coming from a condominium. Condominium instruments have sometimes slightly different requirements for board meeting notice, but I always like to look exactly at the statute when asked about something like this. So I can just see if I can quickly put my hands on it. It's in 42-1903.03, but you don't need to write that down. See if I can find that quickly. Here, getting there, getting closer, much closer. It's usually something like 5 days, but let me see. It'll come up. Here we go. For an annual meeting, 21 days notice. Probably you were talking about board meetings. For any other kind of association, not board meeting, it's 7 days notice. But for board meetings, let's see here if it's specified. Mm-hmm.
Molly, while you're looking that up,
Yep.
somebody asked if we could include your Robert's Rule cheat sheet in the posting when we put it up on the website. Would that be all right?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I would need to send it to you. And
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
think it includes, maybe I'll be inspired to include these meeting minutes updates from the 12th edition.
Okay.
About, well, notice. Huh. I'm not quickly seeing the number of days that board meeting notice. So I'll just read one thing about notice about board meetings. Notice including time, date, place of each executive board meeting shall be furnished to a unit owner who requested and published in a location reasonably calculated to be seen by unit owners. Now that's a little different from Virginia, by the way. Virginia requires it to be published in a manner reasonably calculated to be seen by a majority of unit owners. Fun fact. But anyway, this just says unit owners. So request, yep. I would say look at your condominium instruments to see if there's a time clock or a deadline, advanced deadline. And 5 days is sort of sticking in my mind for condo board meetings in DC. But you might, the more the merrier. 7 days would be a good practice. Like, because we have here 7 days notice is required for any association-wide special meeting, but with 21 days advance notice for the annual meeting.
Okay, so we had a hand raised. Miriam, did you have a question?
I did. So are you seeing more litigation that points to meeting minutes for more background if a suit were to come forward?
No, I'm not, but I see a lot of trouble prior to any litigation being filed and when no minutes are taken. One client of mine had a kind of a coup happen, a big disruption and a lot of angst. And so called me up, we worked through all these problems that were fomenting. And I mentioned something about meeting minutes and they said, what do you mean meeting minutes? And nobody had taken any for a period of years of any board meeting. That's a huge problem and a big liability because it shows that nothing happened, but things did happen. Then what was the legal authority for any bill to be paid, for any work to be done or not done? It's now we're getting back into shape and I hope a lawsuit isn't filed. I think we are managing things well, and I hope I think it's reasonable to think a lawsuit will not be filed in this particular case, but it sure does require them to consult with me more than they would need to understand what should we do, what do we need to do. So even in a non-litigation context, having minutes can be a time saver and a cost saver. Even though there's some costs up front, you have to figure out even how to take them, who's going to do it, get an agenda squared away in advance so you can use that as the backbone for meeting minutes. So that all takes work, but many boards do all that easily, and have a practice down or discipline, I guess, to do all that and without even really thinking about it. And so they have really good corporate record.
I accidentally clicked to answer live a question. Jay, you asked about reserve studies and if there were other companies besides Smart Property. Actually, next month's presentation is on reserve studies.
Yay!
And so, right, so we can answer that then. But I do think there are some other companies out there that provide an electronic system for that. And so we can jump into that next month. So thanks for giving me the segue to tell everyone. Thank you for attending today. Next month's section is going to be on reserve studies. So we have another question just came through that says, currently our open and executive sessions are on the same Zoom link recording. Would you advise having separate Zoom meetings for the executive and open sessions so that we can share the open meeting with the community without any privacy concerns?
Great question. I've seen it done both ways. I would recommend doing it in a way that is logistically easiest for you during the time of the meeting. If it's easy for everybody to hop into a different Zoom for exec session, let everyone wait on hold. If anybody does want to wait during open for you to potentially come back into open and then jump back into a different Zoom for open, if that's easy, do it. And it gives you a sense of confidence that absolutely nobody will be able to break into our exec session, then that's really good. If on the other hand, it's a little unwieldy to have two different Zooms, or it's hard to keep one open or weird, or then I would say, and it's easy for you to figure out how to exclude people in your regular Zoom in order to conduct an executive session, then do it that way. And then you can come back into open in the same Zoom. Maybe
rookie question real quick. Can you just pause the recording, say the board went into executive session, and pause it and then come back to then reopen the recording for if you need to record a vote?
Yes, and I'm assuming there are no audience members in that fact setup. Correct. So
Okay.
I was speaking more about excluding non-board members, but you're correct. You can pause the recording. And you might want to do a little framing around the pausing and the unpausing to say, okay, at this time we're going into executive session. Can I have a motion? I move to executive session to speak to legal. Second, and we are now stopping recording. Stop, pause, and then talk. And there's nobody, if there's nobody at your meeting besides board members, you don't have to worry about excluding people from the Zoom, what I was talking about earlier. And then when you restart, you don't have to say anything. You just restart recording and say, we just concluded our executive session. We are now in open and recording again. And here's what our votes are. Here's what we have to say. Yep, that's a great way. Good idea.
Okay. All right. I don't see any further questions. I want to thank everyone again and thank Molly for the presentation. This was really helpful. Want to reiterate from a management standpoint how important it is that you do keep minutes and take care of those. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you all so much for taking your time. Third Thursday of every month at noon. Next session will be on reserve studies. So thanks again.
Thank you all.